Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Community Relations Corner, where we discuss issues of concern to New York's Jewish community and our friends and partners all over the city. I'm your host, Michael Miller, the Executive Vice President and CEO of the Jewish Community Relations Council of JCRC-NY, and on each episode of Community Relations Corner, we're joined by guests representing the political, religious, economic, and diverse community leadership in New York, many of whom I've had the honor and pleasure of getting to know over the course of my lengthy tenure here at JCRC. Together, we'll explore topics spanning their interests, backgrounds, and current events impacting the New York Jewish community and its neighbors, as well as the state of our city, the state of our state, and the state of our nation. But first, a word of thanks to our wonderful sponsor. This episode is sponsored by the Free Synagogue of Flushing, serving the Reformed Jewish community in Queens, New York for over a century. Visit freesynagogueflushing.org for a 360-degree panorama of its magnificent stained glass sanctuary and immerse yourself in a piece of Queens Jewish history. Join Free Synagogue of Flushing for a wide array of programming and webinars, and the beautiful sanctuary, social hall, and meditation garden are available for rent to add to your joyous occasions. Visit freesynagogueflushing.org to learn more about their Shabbat services and weekly Sunday school. Once again, freesynagogueflushing.org. We thank them so much for their generous support of these programs. And now it's my pleasure to introduce today's guest on the Community Relations Corner. And he is the very interviewed himself, the national political reporter, national politics reporter for Jewish Insider. And he has been referred to as the most famous Hasidic journalist in America by the Forward, and some would say in the world. And his name is Jacob Kornbluh. Welcome, Jacob.
Good to be with you, Rabbi.
You're welcome. Great to be with you as well. And we were schmoozing before we went live that we have known each other for an exceedingly long time. We won't tell anybody exactly how long, so we don't want to give away our ages. But what's most important, Jacob, is that wherever there's a story to be covered that impacts on politics, I always see you there. I don't even remember an event where you haven't been there. It's really to your great credit. But let's really introduce you to the audience. But they need to know more about you, about your journey. That I guess is just not very typical among the Hasidic community to have a career that's essentially in secular reporting and journalism, but secular journalism. So from your accent, you were not born here in the United States, so let's get into that a little bit. How did you get into journalism, and how did you ultimately become the person that you are, the most famous Hasidic reporter in America and probably the world? Jacob?
So first of all, Michael, you are the most favorite rabbi in the entire world.
Thank you.
And I would agree with you that I probably haven't missed any JCRC event in the last 8 years. Zoom calls, I don't include in that because just it's too much. But any local event that JCRC has is always dynamic, and always I find it very eventful. I would say that it goes back, me growing up, I always was passionate with everything I did, okay? If it was writing down my Talmudical studies, listening to drushes and speeches in yeshiva and writing them down, doing my own chidushim, but also being very, attuned to what's happening around in the political world. At the time I was growing up in London, I was very much interested in British politics, which is very interesting, sometimes boring, but nonetheless very interesting. Observed what was happening in Israel. When I was a teenager, Yitzhak Rabin was murdered. So people became more, involved in understanding, what was happening in Israel. when I went to yeshiva in Israel, obviously I was reading all the newspapers, listening to all the shows. And when I got here to America, what I found was that it's not only me who's passionate about this, that there's people around me, members of my congregation or friends, who are also very much interested in politics. But at the time, there wasn't really a medium where you would sit down and discuss it, other than coming to shul Friday night and Shabbos morning at Kiddush, where people would congregate and gather around my table to hear my thoughts about the presidential election, about local and international politics. It was only in 2008 when Facebook and Twitter was launched that I found myself in a situation where I was like, why should I only keep my thoughts the entire week and wait for Friday night to share them with some of my friends? Why don't I just take a medium, create a blog where I just put down not only my own thoughts, but whatever I find interesting that I would like other people to follow. And that led me to, and again, at the time I was a restaurant owner, so
Really?
that gave me the free time.
I didn't know. I didn't know that.
Throwing pizzas into the oven and creating salads, and I was a chef for a few years. But in my free time, I was following the news, writing down whatever I found was interesting, especially issues that are important to our community. And in 2013, when the New York City mayoral race kicked off, I was unemployed at the time, and I figured that I would translate my passion, but also my motivation to report and to tweet and so forth, to actually engage with the candidates who are running for office, to attend all these community and civic forums, ask them the questions that regular reporters wouldn't ask them, because it was a complex issue at the time. It was Metzitza B'Peh, education, vouchers, of course, support for Israel. At a few years later, I was hired by Jewish Insider to take that to a national level, and here I am.
Yeah, but you first started off doing it on your own as just as a blogger.
Right.
Right, but everybody used to read your blogs. So,
yeah, actually, it's interesting because right now I'm a I'm a reporter. I follow ethical and moral standards. But at the time, I was just a political junkie. I was more opinionated than I am right now. I had this blog focused just on Israeli politics. It was called Bibi Report.
I never saw that one.
It was just created because Prime Minister Netanyahu was eyeing a comeback 10 years after he lost his re-election. And I was just fascinated by whatever was happening in Israel. So I tried to also write and, in English. I didn't attend journalism school. I don't have a degree. And if you hear in my accent and the way I talk, that I'm not necessarily the typical reporter you would find coming out from school. But nonetheless, I was passionate about it. And this gave me just, more motivation to ask, to be informed, to read a lot, and ultimately to inform others and bring awareness to some issues that the Jewish community cares about.
Well, that's a very good segue to my next question, which is that since you're covering national politics here in the States, what have you learned about how the Jewish community consumes news, what we're interested in, what media actually attracts the Jewish community, and kind of what are the major issues on the national political scene that impact on our community?
So it's an interesting question because we are in a different situation right now, in a different election than in 2016. I would say in 2016, the discussion was more political, but on issues that the community actually cares about. It was after 8 years of Obama. Hillary Clinton was a known figure within the community. She was a senator. She had her relationships, but there came Donald Trump, who disrupted this whole process, and people became very engaged. And I'm talking specifically about the Orthodox Jewish community. Obviously, in the Jewish community in general, a majority of the Jewish community support or more aligned with the Democratic Party. But in this neighborhood where I reside in, but mostly in New York City, where there's a large Orthodox Jewish population, people became more engaged on a local level, but also starting to debate issues that wasn't necessarily an issue going back for the past 15 years. You know, people were not talking about Supreme Court at the time, or abortion laws, or you know, politics in nature, more about support for Israel and, you know, education, vouchers, Supreme Court only when it came to religious matters. And so people became very much engaged, but it was also social media platforms that played a role where you could consume and get your news from an echo chamber, where you follow certain people. This is what you get. These are the opinions that actually form your mind, and you stick with it. You gain a following, or you follow a certain political figure. That is where you get your news from, and that is how you distribute it, debate it, and actually want to attempt to win an argument over others who think differently. I think in this election, it has changed dramatically just because of COVID, just because it impacts lives as well. So people are not looking at it just from a political lens, where if you're a Republican, you support President Trump. If you're a Democrat, you support Joe Biden. It has also become, you know, if you support President Trump, do you favor wearing masks and complying with social distancing rules? And if you're a Democrat, is it because you're influenced by the quote unquote fake news media and just want to believe Fauci and the other experts just because they are perceived as Democrats and as opponents to President Trump? So it's become very political, and I don't think there's an emphasis on real issues other than the political spectrum, where November 4th, no matter who gets elected, COVID is still here. We still have to deal with it. And there are many issues that both candidates have spoken about, and that actually impacts the Orthodox Jewish community in particular, but also in general, the Jewish community and Americans alike. And I think that that is what is lacking right now, is in the political discourse, focusing on issues that could actually impact our lives, but also the future of us and our future generations.
Yeah, you touched on a number of subjects that I want to get into, but let's deal with one, that identification with the media of being fake news. What does that mean to you, and what do you do differently to ensure that Jewish Insider, at least your reporting within Jewish Insider, is not viewed as being quote unquote fake news?
Well, I focus mainly on the issues, but also being objective in a sense where I present you what is happening, the views of both sides in a very balanced view, but not inserting myself as being part of the story or my opinion to formulate that. And I think I've done a pretty good job in both giving, again, our readership is a very engaged readership. It's a readership that really cares about certain issues, is passionate about certain issues. But, you know, everybody wants to sometimes read only what they think and what people think like them. And I try to provide whatever's happening on the scene, featuring candidates who are running for office, who are seeking to gain the trust of the Jewish community, but also using that office for enacting policies that would impact us all. And I think I can serve as a medium, bringing awareness to certain issues that mainstream media wouldn't necessarily focus on, just because they're more broader issues that they cover, but also giving people the 15 minutes every morning to get informed about whatever's happening, who is running, what their positions are, what policies are being considered and implemented in Washington and across the board. And I think that it is important, not only for myself, but important for the role the media plays, but also for people who read about issues, that they take that as being information and data that they can consume, but then formulate their own opinion. And whatever their opinion is, you should go with that, but not use certain information or partial information that you get to spread it further.
Right. I understand. Let's now drill down into the Haredi world. The pandemic back in March and April really had a very devastating impact on Borough Park in particular. There were numerous people who became ill. There were all too many people, hundreds who died, who were killed by the virus. So what took place then? It's going back a little bit in history, but not that far back, few months. What took place then in regard to abiding by lockdowns, and what was the community reaction to that trauma that they were experiencing around them?
So it's interesting because at the time, and people tend to forget, at the time it was New Rochelle, but also Borough Park that was hard hit at the start of the outbreak. Right. It took a week or two until government and community came together to actually adapt to the new situation and implement harsh restrictions. But if you recall, it was mid-March when the White House did a conference call with some Hasidic rabbis, and it was decided upon themselves. They decided to close down the shuls and the schools as a matter of pikuach nefesh, just because it was a matter of saving lives. And so at the start, when everybody was confused, when everybody was frustrated, when people were just locking themselves up at home, not knowing what would bring next and who would be the next admitted to the hospital, I think there was this sense of urgency that we have to act without looking at the nuances, without looking at why and what other people are saying. But it didn't take much time until certain people elevated that voice, which was that this is not about, this is not a health issue that we're dealing with. This is sort of another attempt by government to control us.
Even back then in March and April?
Yes. Again, those were on the fringe, okay? But the argument was brewing then.
Really?
The argument was brewing where those people who thought it was pikuach nefesh, those people who were really concerned about what was happening and really attempting to save lives, because that should be the objective of all of us the entire time, they felt that we need to take some drastic measures upon ourselves to do it, but government shouldn't be the one dictating it to us. And so while a majority of the community at the time, an overwhelming majority, complied with the social distancing restrictions, it was a few weeks into the outbreak when things got calmer a little, when people were sort of waking up from that state of shock where you didn't hear anymore the 10, 20, 30 funeral announcements a day, that the reopening process was very gradual and very slow. Meaning to say, it wasn't just the mayor deciding what the priorities were. That was the phases that people felt that it went a little too slow in terms of prioritizing religious and ritual practices, which is very important for the community as a whole. And they felt that either the government is not sensitive to that, or that this is an attempt by government currently controlled by members of the Democratic Party to undermine the president and to, impose their own control over certain issues that the community cares about. So it was in the months of June and July where the infection rate was really low that people didn't pay much attention. People were arguing there's probably herd immunity or the virus has carried off and moved away from New York, but was also that people were lax in complying with the restrictions just because they didn't see those horrific numbers, just because it wasn't anymore a matter of life and death.
Really? So was it politically driven or was it communally driven? What was the What really changed within the Orthodox community from the beginning of the pandemic until now, and why the sudden turn to violence and rioting by some members of the community, and how representative were those individuals who did engage in that activity of the community as a whole?
So you have to separate this in three groups, where
Okay.
you have people, again, specifically in the Orthodox community, who would comply with any measures, would go on wearing masks just because they believe in the science, just because they believe that their collective responsibility is to continue doing this in order to defeat the virus. But then you have an overwhelming majority of the community where they are law-abiding citizens. They have a sense of responsibility when it comes to issues of life and death, but also to religious practices. And this is where the clash came upon. Again, the third group, obviously, is that fringe group that was led recently by a populist, dangerous individual who were defying the measures, who are calling for non-compliance and just engaging in activity that we have never known within the community, or especially in these neighborhoods. But the majority of people, they look for guidance. And when the infection rate was low and nobody was guiding them to what was really happening or what they should continue doing, people became lax. People understood that, hey, first of all, if you're politically opinionated, you will take one side. You will take either the side of Joe Biden, of being very careful in your social circles, being very careful about attending religious gatherings or weddings, or you would take the side of either I got sick already, so I have immunity, either there's herd immunity, or that it's fine to get sick just because they look at the president who's saying, here, I got sick, I was even admitted to the hospital and I defeated it within 2 days. But it's not because they do not want to comply. It's not because they feel that this is opposite of what they believe in. It's just because it's a sensitive issue to impose certain restrictions on a community who is very much traditionally very religious oriented. Gatherings in the community is our social life. Going 3 times a day to prayer services is something that you can't take away from the community. And I think that both people within the community, of guiding others to wear masks, keep social distancing measures, and understand that this is a serious health crisis that is not going away, but also government that did not educate people about what was happening, a government that did not allocate the right resources when they saw an uptick in cases, and a government that, when there was an uptick, took drastic measures in a very short period of time that the community felt that they are being targeted and singled out. So what did the community, or maybe you have opinions yourself, what should government have done? What should the mayor or the governor have done, or others, if you want to go beyond those two, that the community might have paid attention to, and we wouldn't have ended up with the violence on the streets and the raising of voices? Again, what responsibility did they have, and what didn't they do that they should have done? So I think you're seeing it right now, activity that is being initiated by local institutions, which could have been done in August when we saw the start of another, call it uptick in cases, right. Encouraging mass testing, where you actually get an accurate sample of what the positivity rate is. If you sample only 155 cases, which was the first sample that Governor Cuomo announced that there's an uptick in cases, of 155 cases, you can't really get an accurate sample, especially in a neighborhood that has probably over 150,000 people. And especially over Yom Tov, especially over the holidays. Right, and where people are not really encouraged to go get tested, but if you feel sick or you happen to go to the doctor or you happen to go past the clinic and see no lines, you'll go in and test. So I think that was the number one problem, where government did not allocate the right resources to get to a rapid and mass testing period, where at least you would get an accurate sample. The second was the outreach. How do you encourage people to actually comply with the measures, but also understand that this is serious? Putting an ad in a newspaper, where a weekly publication that has probably 200 or 300 ads, that wouldn't necessarily get noticed. A lot of people within the community, especially the Hasidic community, they speak Yiddish as a mother language.
Right.
Reaching out to them in their own language by using influencers within the community, not only a conference call with a few selected rabbis, but actually influencers within the community, just to bring awareness to the issue. Not talking about policing or any other measure, but just bringing awareness to the issue, educating the community about it, that you can go on with religious practices while wearing a mask and keeping social distance, and avoid at least large gatherings. There could have been implemented a plan where I spoke to certain local lawmakers who initiated an outdoor services plan,
Right.
which would encourage large congregations to hold the services on the street for the high holidays, where the city would give you a permit, street closures, or a permit for a tent, where you can actually hold outdoor services. All of these measures could have been done before that to actually deal with the infection rate. But I would also add, it was after it already went a little out of control. I'm not saying it went out of control because we didn't see the numbers that we saw back in March, but I think when the governor and the mayor stepped up and alarmed the media and the city about it, they only gave a very small window for the community to actually adapt. And once they issued those restrictions, it was restrictions that wouldn't work. One, they wouldn't work just because they limited services during a holiday to 10 people, where most of the synagogues have minimum 20 people, and I'm talking about the smaller synagogue in Borough Park.
Right.
Okay, that's number one. And number two, the issue of enforcement. If you're already implementing these restrictions, if you're already committing yourself to enforce the heck out of it, let's see your action. And if you cannot do it, you have to rethink your policies in order to make it an effective measure to defeat this virus and bring down, at least contain this virus by bringing down the infection rate.
So where are we now? Where are we now? Where is the community? I noticed, of course, I think we all noticed that Orange County went from red to orange, but central southern Brooklyn is still red. So it means that covering Borough Park. So what is the status of the infection rate within the community, and are measures being taken by community leadership to try to bring the numbers down?
Yeah, as I mentioned in my previous answer, that there are large institutions and congregations that are actually encouraging people to get tested. I just got a WhatsApp notice from one of the biggest Hasidic communities in Borough Park with time and location of why people should get tested in Yiddish, and encouraging people that this is something that we have to take, not only to bring down the numbers in order to get out the government off our backs, but actually to get an accurate rate in order to deal with it. I believe that if this activity continues, and with the government now starting to release the real numbers, because what they released back in the beginning of September was based on a sample of 200, 300 cases.
Really?
They haven't provided the media or local elected officials with the real numbers of how many tests are being done, of what the real positivity rate is, and where we are right now. I believe that if this continues, if compliance continues without people being lax, without people feeling that government is out to get us, that is out to target us, and when there are initiatives within the community to actually encourage people to comply, isolate those dark voices, isolated those people who engage in violence, and work with government, I believe that we will get out of this crisis pretty soon.
Okay, thank you for those answers. We're going to take a little break, and another thank you to our sponsor before we get back to the question that a lot of our viewers want to know about, which is what happened to you, beyond just being a byline where you ended up in the story. But first, just a word of thanks to our sponsor for this episode, the Free Synagogue of Flushing, serving the Reformed Jewish community in Queens, New York for over a century. Visit freesynagogueflushing.org for a 360-degree panorama of its magnificent stained glass sanctuary and immerse yourself in a piece of Queens Jewish history. Just please join them for a wide array of programming and webinars, and the beautiful sanctuary, social hall, and meditation garden are available for rent to add to your special occasions. Visit freesynagogueflushing.org to learn about their Shabbat services as well as their Sunday school. Once again, visit freesynagogueflushing.org. And back to our guest, and again, I guess in the news as opposed to writing about the news. So many of our viewers have probably seen the footage of your experience. I think it was about 3 weeks ago when you were attacked. Can you explain what happened and what brought the community to such a point? How are you feeling now about it a couple of weeks later? And depending on who wins the national election, what do you think your community is going to do in reaction? And will angry individuals be embroiled if either candidate wins? What kind of a world are we living in now, particularly in Borough Park, Brooklyn?
You asked a very sophisticated question. I cannot answer you on what will happen after November 4, because we don't know who's going to win, but also what the reaction is going to be, depending on the margin, depending how people react to the news, but also how the national response will be to this. Usually people jump onto a wagon that has already started to move. So if there's riots in the street, then people go to those riots and start to engage. If people are angry and claim that this election was rigged, more people will jump onto that argument. So I can't actually tell you what people will do, but what I can tell you is that in terms of support for Trump in the Orthodox community, there's overwhelming support, probably passing his 2016 share of the vote. But there's also, people who supported Trump in 2016 who are frustrated by all the chaos and what was happening over the past 4 years and are disappointed with the federal response to COVID. What I would say is that the reason we saw what happened 2 weeks ago was because there is this vacuum, because people are angry and frustrated, sometimes rightfully so, sometimes because government hasn't acted the right way, sometimes because they feel that the media has jumped upon stigmatizing and singling out the Jewish community when there are other communities who also engage in non-compliance, and also because there are some people there who are seeking to advance their political career, who are looking for attention, and the only way they get their attention is by being loud and by being acting in a way where some see it as dangerous and some see it as coming to save the community. Mm-hmm. And so when you claim to be a voice for the voiceless, when you come and engage in rhetoric, in rhetoric that we have never heard before, when you engage in activity that you claim to be the activity as a response to what government has done, people say, you know what, he's my hero. You know what, I will also follow that line because that's the only way we get out of the crisis. I think at this time particular, not only do we need to implement certain reforms as how to we react to certain political realities, how we react to certain things that are happening within our community, but also to isolate those figures so we don't see a replication of what has happened. It's not about me. I don't want to be part of the story. I want to continue to do my job. I love my job. I'm very passionate about it. And as you know, I don't claim to want to be the most popular journalist, and people know me long before this has happened to me, and nobody wants to face this level of hate and intimidation. But I also believe that this is a response to a government that has proven to be ineffective, to a community that felt targeted, but also very frustrated about an issue that has turned political and that has also been viewed as, if you comply, you are okay, you are safe. If you don't comply, you're unprotected, you're going to die. And when you look at the numbers, this is clearly not the case.
Yeah, but you studiously avoided speaking about yourself. So I'm going to go back to it. How did the events of 3 weeks ago impact on you? Are they still impacting on you? Are you doing anything differently? You did have some police, not police, you had security looking after you. You have a family. I mean, what are your concerns today that may have been alleviated over the past couple of weeks? But again, where's Jacob Kornbluh today?
Well, yes, of course, I've learned my lesson. It is very unfortunate that I couldn't at the time walk on the streets of my own neighborhood, do my job as a reporter, attempting not to be noticed even. And so what I felt at the time was that people are being fed a campaign of lies and disinformation, that people think that what I did back in March and April, which was challenge the mayor on enforcement when I was very much alarmed about the situation, and as myself being brought up with the value of saving each individual life, that I feel that once people took that narrative where I'm being portrayed as a moiser, as a snitch, whatever I'm going to do is going to be viewed in that lens. And I think that people didn't appreciate at the time, and probably do not appreciate right now, that I am just doing my job as a member of the media about providing the data, bringing the accurate information to the forefront for people to know, and also for government to know what's really happening, what the issues are, and how it's impacting the community. And because of the act of a few individuals, this has totally been diluted and turned into a personal campaign against me, which I don't want it to be continued, but I also won't be intimidated, and I will do my job undeterred just because I feel that I'm doing the right thing ethically, morally, but also because our collective responsibility has to always be about saving lives.
Right. Well, that's the right way to think. But when you wake up in the morning and you leave your apartment and go out into the street,
I try not to walk on the street too frequently. Thank God, my boss has given me a safe haven, which is, first of all, I'm protected, and also I have my job responsibilities that I do not need to wander on the street, that I can do my job, engage with people, focus on the issues that matters, do my job in an ethical and objective manner, but also try to be careful about those people who try to harm me, and mostly try to ignore the noise, because the noise out there is very loud, and the people who are engaging in dangerous behavior are still being elevated, still being treated like a hero. And as long as that continues, as long as people are very politically charged, and as long as people will see my work as something that is damaging to them, I think they'll always face that level of, animosity against me.
Right. But again, just to drill down a little bit further in regard to your ability, let's say, to go to synagogue, to go to shul, on Shabbos, let's say.
Well, I tried to avoid it that during right immediately after the protest, and hopefully I will be able to go back wearing my mask, keeping social distance, and again, I'm not trying to spotlight the issues within the community or to put a bad light on the community, which I think a majority of is actually engaging in compliance with the measures. But I also believe that, I shouldn't be attacked for doing my job, but also for being a citizen of this great country.
Right. Actually, I saw, and probably some of our viewers saw as well, the statement that was issued in Yiddish by the Satmar Rebbe, by Reb Zalman Leib, condemning protests and violence, and I think and encouraging compliance and testing. I think that was a significant step in the right direction. I want to get to a byproduct of all of this, and that is the image of the Orthodox community, particularly the Haredi community in America at large and in the world. Do you feel that certain portrayals, and I've heard this from many, again, you're the reporter, but I'm asking you the question, do you think that this portrayal of the Orthodox community during that period of the disruptions and the demonstrations and the riots, et cetera, contributes to anti-Semitism, hatred directed towards our community? And what can we do in order to educate that, yes, those incidents did take place, but they were, as you refer to them, as a fringe within the community?
Yeah, we've seen a few reports recently about anti-Semitic attacks. I don't know if we can attribute that just to the fact that the Orthodox community has been in the headlines for the past couple of weeks, but also probably just because we are visibly Jewish and just because we are so politically charged at this moment. But yeah, of course, engaging in rhetoric where you're singling out one particular community in a neighborhood that is pretty much diverse. You have a large Hispanic community, Muslim, Italian community, Asian community in Borough Park itself. So when you focus on a certain neighborhood, or you just call red zones in neighborhoods with a large Jewish population, people feel that could elevate voices who are taking action into their own matters. But if you look back in December, when there was a rash of anti-Semitic violent attacks against members of the Orthodox community, there was nothing that drove them to do that, but just sometimes there's a lone wolf attack, and sometimes people are motivated by what they're seeing on TV and what they're reading about. I do believe that, again, not using the word anti-Semitism lightly, applying it on our political leaders who have a long-standing relationship with the community and have a proven record of speaking out against anti-Semitism and in support of Israel. If we put that aside and we focus on encouraging, and obviously the mayor has apologized for his approach and for singling out Jews. The governor has also implied that he shouldn't have singled out the Jewish community as a whole as being non-compliant. But I also believe that it's their role as bully pulpits, but also as policymakers, to make sure that they are sensitive to the issues that we grapple with, that when they enforce measures that they know that people would be able to actually implement and comply with, and within the community to elevate voices who are actually credible and are pragmatic and respectful mostly. Isolate those who are disrespectful, isolate those who engage in violence, and make sure that people get the right picture. If people will get the right picture, if people will not only see those who are egging on reporters, if people would not only see the videos of weddings taking place during the outbreak, or people burning masks, but also see how people are engaging in chesed, how people are actually trying to help the vulnerable, to protect those who get sick, and also to comply as law-abiding citizens, I think that collective effort on both sides will help mitigate this problem. And hopefully, after all, we'll come out in a much better situation, a positive light, not only on the activity of members of the community who engage in creating this positivity, but also in giving an accurate picture of what this community is about.
Right. I think you're correct on that, and hopefully that'll be the case. I'm concerned. I wonder if you're concerned. I know there was a spike, a significant measuring of anti-Semitic incidents right before the pandemic hit, and then the pandemic hit, and the numbers plummeted in terms of hate crimes.
Right.
But I'm concerned that once we get beyond the pandemic, and particularly after just what happened and the images that were portrayed of our community, that God forbid we could have another round of anti-Semitic incidents. Does that concern you as well?
Absolutely, and I think that is why I believe that, number one, we have to tone down the rhetoric. Number two, undertake measures that would protect the community and ensure those walking on the street, they would never be attacked for what they are or for what they represent. And just because they are Jews, they shouldn't be attacked for the activity of others. But also, I think that we all hope that something will be resolved next week and people will tone down the divisiveness, but also act when they see it. Speak out against anti-Semitism, act when you pledge to act, implement certain federal hate crime laws or laws against hate speech. And we see members of representatives in federal office on a local level as well, and candidates who are running for office who are actually committing themselves to do that. So I think, again, you cannot call a crime before it happened, and you can always protect the community if, God forbid, that happens. But we should also have a collective responsibility to try and stamp down on it, try and prevent those attacks from actually happening.
And then we at JCRC, in partnership with UJA, established this community security initiative, which is even today, during these past months, during the pandemic, doing everything that we can to ensure the safety and security of our Jewish community, and particularly our Jewish institutions in New York. But you kind of touched on one last question I want to ask you in regard to the politics of what's going to be happening on November the 3rd. Before, I think, again, you tried to skirt around predicting the presidential election. Even if you want to still do that, of course, I'm curious to know what your thoughts are. But on the House and on the Senate, you're following national politics. Just looking for trends. There've been quite a number of polls out there. People are wary of polls after the polling failed in 2016. What internal poll are you using, Jacob, to take a look at what we're going to be viewing on Capitol Hill come January 1st or January 20th?
I think so much is happening that you can't actually predict, just because we have never been faced with a situation where there's a global pandemic, where people, the economy was trending positive and then took a downturn, where the leader of our country has been, dismissing science and, taking a different approach to politics as previous presidents and candidates. But also, just because we don't know if there's going to be a definite outcome on November 3rd. We might wait and have an election week or an election night month. The ballots, well, we hoped that we wouldn't have been right now in the midst of a pandemic 6 months going into the outbreak. So we shouldn't hope for anything, frankly. But I think that, it's very hard to predict, because based on polling data, based on trends, it looks like that Joe Biden has a significant, but also a static lead against the president. But if you look at the battleground states, it's pretty a tight race, could go either way. What I said in 2016 was, if you see President Trump trailing by 2 or 3, you should presume that he's leading by 2 or 3. And not because of the statistical ties, not because there's a margin of error, but there is sort of a silent vote. At the time, it was a Republican independent vote, a white class vote that was silent. Some of Obama voters who switched sides and voted for Trump. And I think now you have certain black voters who, you know, are encouraged by what they saw, the implementation of the criminal justice reform and President Trump's approach to certain policies, but also just because people are, number one, try to trick the pollsters, but also you cannot really get what their mood is on any given day to what they're actually going to vote for on election day, how it's going to look like. And I think that in a state, in a battleground state, that you see Trump either 1 point ahead or trailing by 2, I think you can presume based on the 2016 outcome that there's a likelihood that he might win those states. For instance, Florida, Georgia, and Pennsylvania, it's a tight race. Some polls give him 6%, trailing 6% of Joe Biden, but some see it as a statistical tie. But there's also not many options for him. He has to win Pennsylvania, Michigan, Arizona, North Carolina, and Georgia and Florida in order to win. So I think you can't really predict it. But if you're asking me how I see it playing out, I think it's very early to predict. Again, if you want to predict that Biden is winning, you are of a majority. And if you want to predict President Trump is winning, you have taken a side, because it's only those who support President Trump who are actually saying that he has a chance. So I still want to maintain my credibility, but I also want to prepare myself to both outcomes. So I am not going to give in to your very articulate question and answer you of who I predict will win this election. But I think in terms of the Senate and the House, obviously the House is not going to flip. The Senate, it seems like it could be a 50-50 situation, or the Democrats could regain control. And again, depending on who becomes president, if the Senate flips and Trump remains president, you could see a very different political situation. If the opposite, if Biden wins the presidency and has total control of the House and the Senate, you will see him being pushed by the left, by the progressives within his own party, to act in the same way that President Obama was slow to act in the first 2 years that he had total control of all executive and legislative branches.
Right. Wow. Thank you very, very much, Jacob. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on our Community Relations Corner. I've always enjoyed, I think it's mutual, but I've always enjoyed my interaction with you.
I'm biased when it comes to you.
Thank you. Both here in New York as well as in Israel when we've traveled together. And I really would look forward somewhere down the road of inviting you back on for another conversation, just to kind of take the pulse of where we are politically in this country, and hopefully nothing revolving around you as opposed to what your views are, God willing, Bezrat Hashem. Okay, so again, thank you very much, Jacob Kornbluh, for joining us on Community Relations Corner. I do want to thank one more time our wonderful sponsors for the corner, and our sponsor is the Free Synagogue of Flushing. And this episode has been sponsored by the Free Synagogue of Flushing, serving the Reformed Jewish community in Queens, New York for over a century. Visit freesynagogueflushing.org for a 360-degree panorama of its magnificent stained glass sanctuary, and immerse yourself in a piece of Queens Jewish history. Join the synagogue for a wide array of programming and webinars, and the beautiful sanctuary, social hall, and meditation garden are available for rent for your joyous occasions, for your simchas. Please visit freesynagogueflushing.org to learn more about their Shabbat and weekly Shabbat services and weekly Sunday school. Please visit freesynagogueflushing.org. Our thanks to their president, Ed Schauder, who's a member of our board of directors, and to Alan Bravo, who is their cantor and executive director, two wonderful friends. Thanks to our audience for joining us live. Thanks to our production team, who I keep on leaving out every week, Noam Gilboard, Rebecca Grossman, and Jennifer Glick. I'm Michael Biller and have been with you with Jacob Kornbluh over this past hour approximately, and we look forward to seeing you next time on the next episode of Community Relations Corner. Take care, everybody. Shalom, and be well.